We're here to talk about why local businesses and local retailers and buying local, why we should care about it. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa Amlani from Retail Strategy Group. My background is really focused on merchandising and product development. I have about 20 years, probably more, working with retailers and brands from a merchant perspective, as a buyer, as a buying lead for Ralph Lauren in the UK, Ralph Lauren here, department stores, as well as working in the strategy consulting side of things, coming from Accenture, working with Walmarts and Nikes of the world. So I have quite a vast understanding of the end-to-end when it comes to the merchandising process.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just going to blast my intro for everybody. So I have an international reputation for executing physical and digital supply chain innovation, digitization and agility across the end-to-end supply chain, which includes manufacturing, third-party logistics, wholesaling, retailing, and the last mile. When it comes to tackling mission-critical issues, what I do is align business processes, systems, architecture, culture, and KPIs across retail supply chains. I'm a recognized thought leader, speaker, podcaster, and trainer in retail supply chains of the future. I recently awarded a number of things. I think the most proudest thing that I've recently awarded is a Retail Rethink's Top 100 Retail Influencers 2021. I'd be just happy being in the top 10 of retail supply chain thought leaders, but this was rather remarkable. So in terms of trying to set the scene for our conversation, we got together a few weeks ago and we were just talking about the kind of subjects we thought might be very helpful, relevant and topical at this time as we work through this pandemic and all the great plans for a vaccine and we get back to normal somehow. But in that tranche of, I'm going to call it destruction in its wake, we've been, just strange enough, broadly in this week, it was a week last year, but we went into lockdown. And I think this is going to go on for another year before we re-emerge into some new normal. During that period of time, something in the order of maybe 250,000 small businesses, and our emphasis is more on the supply, the retail supply chain, that's retailers and their artisan local suppliers, may actually not continue business.
Yeah.
And just to put that in context, that's about a third of our businesses in Canada on the basis that we've got about 750. So we've got some big issues ahead of us. Those small businesses are like pillars of our community. They're the ones who support the local football team, the local hockey team, whatever. They're the ones who support employment. They're the ones who support their communities. These are in the process of being devastated. So I thought it'd be topical for us to mull this one over at a kind of a pretty high level, and just to see what the major attributes of this time and perhaps what might be going on in those small to mid-sized retailers and those small to mid-sized suppliers who feed that retail economy, and what may be some of the big implications we've got ahead of us.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, just talking about localization, especially from a supplier perspective. When we think about what happened a year and a week ago today, and how really not only did the retailers really suffer, but also the suppliers with canceled orders due to COVID, not being able to ship. And then, of course, subsequently what followed was just visibility into sourcing and the ban of cotton in China, for example, and how that disrupted not only supply chain, but the suppliers. So what are the benefits of local sourcing versus global sourcing, and how does that really impact a retailer of any size, whether they're local, the shop around the corner, or Holt Renfrew in the Bay, for example? I think that is a very interesting conversation, considering we're not exactly leaders in apparel and accessories manufacturing in Canada. That's not the type of sourcing we think of.
Some might think they are, but let's put that one up for a moment.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't have as much of the skill set and the tradespeople here to develop woven fabrics and materials, for example. I think that there's a lot to be said about manufacturing overseas and what that means to your bottom line, but what does that mean when you can't manufacture in China and you can't buy cotton anymore from a certain region that actually has 80% of the cotton production in the world? That's just one example.
I think the farmer, when he was on his kind of bring it back on board to America, was saying that it's easy to move the plant across. That's not the issue. You can put it on a boat, get it over, get it into a building. That's not a problem. It's all those support, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, the ecosystem that takes years sometimes to build up. So we start from a point of view that in our rush to meet our bottom line expectations of our stock market, our investors, our family businesses who want to move in a certain direction, we've been happy to see our capabilities shipped abroad because it's more cost effective. But there's some, when we're in steady state, it's kind of, it's like a comment I made on LinkedIn recently that with the ports, when they're in steady state, it's fine. As soon as they get a slight disruption, we start to see how much has been put under the carpet and is now exposed. And I feel that Canada is particularly exposed, and there's some big implications that run alongside this for our economic health and our well-being of our society.
And I think you bring up a very good point in just thinking of back to January with Brexit. I mean, what happened at the borders and what's still happening, and it is going to happen for the next at least 6 months, the amount of paperwork and red tape to actually get product in and out of the UK is shocking.
And the EU.
Of course, and the EU, it is shocking. It is shocking, and it's not only problematic, but the customer in the end is the one that is losing that battle in terms of price and, of course, supply. Look at Northern Ireland. They're having a food shortage. So I think that localization, definitely there's advantages to that, but the lack of supply and choice, I think, will absolutely come into play, especially with what Biden has proposed with the Made in America push. I think that there's going to be a lot of disruption to apparel and footwear, especially because so much of that is made abroad.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be a good thing if we hadn't given away most of our capabilities, because we could have benefited from that? Because I'm sure that in his world of Buy America, it actually means also look after our strong allies, the UK, Canada, and maybe other parts of the Commonwealth. These are all Western democracies who are like gearing up to maybe benefit from some form of economic resurgence. But here in Canada, I think it's hard to see with the amount of debt we've had in the economy and this huge amount of money that's been spent on subsidies, someone's got to pay that back, how that may slow our ability to bring these capabilities back into our country, set them up and get them going so they can then create the jobs, create the economic activity, pay the tax to allow this huge debt to be repaid pretty quickly. So, and then we can go out and be a good force for good in the world again. Because at the moment, I feel that we may falter on that great mantle.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see your point of view, and I think bringing manufacturing and sourcing and production local, I think that it's a great idea in theory, but I do think that the tradespeople, the skill set, the materials, all of that, I think, is going to really slow down that initiative because we don't have the capabilities, we don't have the tradespeople. And as we see where people are being trained, which is mostly in that technology space, if you don't have product to sell, your technology means nothing.
absolutely. That's a brilliant point. I don't want to overemphasize it, but it does require me to keep bringing it up that we have often gone down the wrong path because we've been in a steady state. We've just made the assumption everything's going, it's not going super high, but it's just chugging along 2% per year, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And while we're in that kind of version of life, steady state, sometimes we have a good year, bad year, but it's like a small moderation of what we've experienced over the last year.
Yeah.
Now we've had this, it really should be asked, our government, our leaders should be asking some big questions about how do we re-equip ourselves? How do we, there's a lot of talk about agility and resiliency, but I suspect if we opened up tomorrow and we demonstrated how resilient we are by locking down in maybe 6 months' time when everyone thinks the coast is clear, we just get back to where we used to be, I think that we will find that there's a lot of talk and not too much walking.
Yeah. And, the one thing that I do hope is that we do push local sourcing. We do support our local manufacturing and production, especially in apparel, because we do have a very small selection of really amazing designers here. And there is a possibility of production here. I think that there's a lot of pros to that. And I think supporting local is absolutely the key to community. We just, as you said, we need to, push our leaders to really give merchandisers, give manufacturers, production facilities, artists, artisans, just that, I guess, leverage in order to actually afford to do that, to have local sourcing and production. I think that's the big key, is affordability. I mean, it's so expensive.
Yeah, we might come back to this point maybe on a future one, because I think there's a whole discussion to be said about. And weirdly, I was on a call with David Laberstar yesterday, and we were talking about, he was the CEO of MEC, equipment company, which was Canada's prime, maybe only purpose-based business enterprise, and he had some interesting things to say. And he came to a similar conclusion with me, that our costing models that look at the world in a certain way are fundamentally not appropriate, not fit for purpose. They do not allow us to look at the whole picture of what we're trying to achieve in the world, and particularly as businesses. But we'll probably come back, because there's quite a lot in there, and I think that we just want to get the big issues on the table right now. But I think that what I would be looking for right now is to see the countries, and maybe even at province level, the industrial strategy, which is the economic plan for the future, what's really important around here. And that should have elements of how they're going to maybe even put up tariffs on things to recalibrate this flow of traffic, but from outside markets, even the US maybe, but certainly from the Far East, and then give subsidies to our own in-house. As you mentioned, there's some of the capabilities we've got to really spend a lot of money and a lot of time and investment to try and get those capabilities expanded quickly, so that we can actually take off the tariffs, take off the subsidies, and those businesses stand on their own 2 feet.
Yeah.
Last time I looked at the industrial strategy, I'm sure it's been rewritten. I think, in fairness to some of my grandchildren, they actually could do a better job.
Yeah.
So our industrial strategy is all about, perhaps being green and being a technology lead and all that lot. And to your point that, if you haven't got products and if you haven't got a wealth creation underpinning in your economy, you have all the technology in the world, you have AI coming out of your ear holes, but it don't really kind of add up to a whole lot if nobody's buying it.
Yeah, exactly. And that also comes from like marketing and PR, right? I mean, if we're pushing made in Canada or even made in North America, I think that that has to come not only from government and leadership, but also head of retail, right? I mean, it has to be across the board, and it has to be in collaboration together with the same messaging,
Yeah.
which is something I've never seen.
No, and these are really big initiatives, and I find Canada quite complicated in terms of its level of government. How does that happen? If we think about the rent subsidy program, that we've got complicated, in some ways, complicated government structures, and we've got complicated association advocacy bodies. So when the government turned to the retail side of business, they had all the like the RCC, they had the IGD, they had small businesses, and all these things going on, all these advocacies that say, well, my members want this. So the government, and I don't blame them for turning, so I can't decide. They're not coming through with a clear message. They're not settled in their approach. So we can't design a rent subsidy program that allows their collective members to actually wear through this period. So at least they survive to the point where we're vaccinated and we're kind of open the doors and we're ready to go. So we've got a very disjointed way of viewing the world. And when we think about some of the things we've already talked about, is bringing back capabilities, developing those, pointing subsidies in certain areas, maybe, as I said, maybe putting up some tariffs or some quotas or whatever it might be, to allow our small artisans, local suppliers to develop, to have that freedom to build quickly. Yeah. I think it might be a big task.
I think so, but I do think that when we're talking about governments and as they are putting together plans for subsidies and small businesses and retailers, and no matter what vertical we're talking about, if those people are not in the room to actually give insights into challenges and pain points and how governments can actually help them, then whatever the government puts out there is actually not going to work. Yeah. And we see that, whether it's Toronto, Bloor Street, Queen Street, King Street, and Yonge Street, all our shopping hubs have changed as stores are closing, and retail will not survive this if government will not support them and support them in the right way. That I think that's the key. Because what we hear is that retailers are not in the room when they're making these decisions. Same thing is happening in the UK. Same thing is happening across Europe, in Italy. That's a whole other story, which we'll save for another day. But if we can localize some of the sourcing and manufacturing and production and design, I think that not only can we be quicker to market, but also support our local communities and local retailers. I think that's something that is, not only key to survival, but also if those people are not in the room, then are the right decisions being made for their survival? Yeah. I'm not sure.
It's pretty, I think it was quite eye-opening when I got a statistic about the UK government. At the time, it might be going back about 10 years. Only 7% of them had actually ever worked in business, and often that was in their sandwich year at university.
What?
Some of them actually had a business career and then they dived into politics, weirdly. But given that, because they're all meant to come from some kind of legal background, so they know how to frame laws, but if they don't have the sense of, that what does business really need? We can see conceptually what they might need within legal frameworks. And we might have regulations for this, that, and the other, looking after the environment and looking after how we treat people in terms of their terms and conditions and stuff like that. That's relatively straightforward to see, certainly if you've been trained in that area. But when you actually look at what businesses need, like right now, if you haven't actually had that exposure and been involved with a small business, a mid-size, or even a big business, to see how they run, it's very hard to conceive the right solution. What's actually needed here? Because it's very hard to diagnose problems if you haven't actually been around those problems and to actually get kind of imbibed the symptoms and sifted them all to actually work out what do they actually need right now.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I talk about that a lot, where if you're a merchant and you're buying product, but you have never worked on the shop floor, or you're in supply chain and you have never been into a DC, you are in the wrong job, because you will never, ever, ever understand what the people who are your brand ambassadors are actually not only going through, but how they manage the changing customers, the evolving assortments, the evolving retail shop floors. How can you do the job if you have never been exposed to the job? The same thing goes for government, in my opinion. But now we digress.
Perhaps coming towards the end of our brief discussion, which is, I think that, when I think about, why should I buy local? Let's put it on the table, because it's easier to talk about other people buying local, but why should I buy local? Well, I believe that the small business, small to mid-sized business, typically the businesses that employ up to 100 people, they're just as a broad statistic, at 70% of people who are employed outside public service are actually employed in businesses of this size.
Yeah.
Why should I buy stuff locally? Well, keeping them alive, because we're talking about, they're in like life support right now, allows them to, when they are able to get back on their feet, are able to re-engage some of the people they've had to let go. They get to live out the rest of their dreams. The reason why they got into small business was they had a plan for retirement, had a plan to look after their children's education, whatever. They've seen those plans. Maybe they've been building on for the last 10, 15, 20 years. Maybe it's family to family. So it might be 50 years.
It's more personal, right?
To see that investment they've made in their business, like slip through their fingers. Why should we support them? It's because they will support us in the future in terms of the tax take they will generate, in terms of the employment prospects they will create, and because I like diversity in the shops I go to. I like to see different things. I don't want to be presented with two choices, Amazon, big box. I think I don't want to live in a world where they're the alternatives and they're telling me this is all you can have. This is the only choice you can have. I think independent businesses, and perhaps I'm being a bit more rarefied in my description, trying to talk, but the mid-sized to small-sized retailers have some value. They can bring very diverse kind of propositions to the marketplace. They're much more interested in serving you as a consumer, and they bring value because they do act they're very community driven. They're the ones, as I mentioned earlier, will support the local hockey team, or they won't do the big thing, like the big national thing. They'll be doing something quite purposeful, sending beef burgers, hamburgers, whatever, into your local scouts group or whatever. They're the ones that are doing that.
Yeah,
and all those things.
You're absolutely right, and it's about having that stake, right? They have a bigger stake and more at risk. When you have more at risk, I think it just makes it a lot more personal.
Yes.
And that's why shopping local is important.
Yes. On that note, we'll move on to our next one in a few weeks.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Hit the like button and leave your comments. Connect with us on LinkedIn to get the heads up on future episodes of The Retail Code.